Hey everybody, it's Party Elite with a beginner's guide to Total War Warhammer. When the time comes to take an enemy city, one can either lay siege till the castle surrenders or assault the castle to take it sooner. Sieges, in real life, can last a very long time. The longest in recorded history went for 21 years. Attempts to end the siege by the defenders failed, and the attackers were unable to take the city by force as well. After 21 years, the defenders finally gave up. Patience is great, but if you're feeling impatient, here's some things to keep in mind. Naturally, as with defending, there are faction specifics, but I want to first provide a general overview and get faction specific later. The first phase as an attacker is actually before the battle even begins, preparing your siege equipment. If you've got artillery, you can destroy enemy wall sections, killing anybody on the wall, and opening up new entry points for your army. Battering rams, monsters, and pickaxe infantry are especially great at forcing gates open, and siege towers protect your soldiers as they advance to the walls. If all else fails, every unit of infantry carries a ladder to help take the walls as well. The next stage is the advance to the walls. Unless you know with absolute certainty the types of units the enemy has on their walls, you'll want to take non-specialized soldiers onto the walls first. Have your sword and axe warriors man the siege towers, including some armor-piercing variants, just like we did on the defensive side. If you concentrate your army on one side of the city, you can take control of the towers there quickly and save your troops from being shot on their approach. Try to rush right down the middle between two defensive towers so you arrive at their firing blind spot as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, advance your other infantry behind the towers. When they get close to the walls, fan them out to climb the walls using their ladders so that they can engage the enemy on the wall from all angles. As this is happening, you'll also want to try breaking down gates or putting holes in walls, whichever is your preferred method of entry and whichever lets you keep your army closer together. This is essential if you have cavalry or monsters and beasts that can't fly. In previous Total War games, cavalry ended up being useless in the city unless you dismounted them. Here, the city alleyways are much wider, and so it's much more valuable to have cavalry on hand. The second phase, as the attacker, begins right when your towers enter the enemy towers as blind spot. Disruption. Remember, the defender was able to position troops based on your deployment. You want to force this positioning out of place, and there are a few ways to do that. Magic that has a destructive area of effect capability is great. Artillery, especially artillery with a high arc, can be used to target the ground where you assume the enemy might be right behind the walls. If you have a flying unit that can give you line of sight, you can target these units specifically. If you don't, you can assume the towers that are firing have units nearby. Finally, flying units should be sent into the city to pick at and distract the enemy. If you find that the enemy is concentrated at the wall, pick off units that may be left in reserve. This can force the enemy to pull some troops back. Alternatively, if you find that the enemy has a very thinly protected wall, as I did here, use these flying units to help take the walls quickly. Whichever you do, just make sure these flying units don't get pinned down and slaughtered. Taking the walls is the next phase, and these phases blend in together so quickly they may as well just be one massive blob. You should keep an eye on engagements and make sure none of your units are sitting idle. There's more room to maneuver on the walls now, and you should use that to help flank and surround enemy units. You can also use any ranged units you might have to rain arrows onto the defenders on the wall, though I tend to save my arrows for later. If the gates have been opened, or a wall section has been destroyed, take a look at what sits on the other side. Send your troops in accordingly, whether it's cavalry, more infantry, or your monsters and beasts. Once you've taken a wall section or two, send your ranged units up immediately. As the defenders run back into the city, rain hell down upon them as you begin to form your army up in their courtyards. Chase them down with any cavalry you might have to thin their numbers as well, but don't let your cavalry get caught in the bulk of the reserves. If necessary, begin to move your artillery forward as well to rain shells down wherever the enemy has congregated. On to the final phase, street fighting. This is probably the messiest part of the whole ordeal, and relies heavily on maneuvering. Advance through the city in as organized a fashion as possible. You will likely need to split your army into small pieces so that you can attack the enemy from multiple angles. If you have ranged units, get them into positions where they can see straight down to the city center. As the enemy needs to protect this area, they're likely to set up a defensive perimeter there. As you advance from multiple angles, the defender has a significant mobility advantage here, so you need to act quickly. Use your ranged units to thin out higher quality troops or to completely destroy units that are low on health. Use cavalry to circle around alleys and disrupt enemy archers. All this time, advance your units carefully so they don't engage with their counters. Enemy morale should be very low, and with a bit more fighting you should be able to break them. After a grueling battle, the city is finally yours. There will be many dead, but that's just the price of taking a castle by force. You just need to make sure that those deaths weren't in vain. And that's what being a great general is about. For more tips and tricks, subscribe to this channel, and if there's something you'd like to see covered, let me know in the comments below.